They demanded she remove her Air Force uniform, questioning her right to wear it. Then Captain Nia Carter climbed into an F-22 Raptor and roared over the camp, proving her place in the sky and silencing their doubts with the thunder of her jet. Her name was Captain Nia Carter, a 32-year-old black woman and fighter pilot in the United States Air Force. Stationed at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Alaska in the summer of 2023, she was one of the few women, and even fewer black women, qualified to fly the F-22 Raptor, the most advanced fighter jet in the world. Nia had earned her wings through relentless determination, graduating top of her class at the Air Force Academy and excelling in flight school. Her record was impeccable. Over 1,500 flight hours, multiple combat missions in the Middle East, and a reputation for precision under pressure. But on a clear July morning, none of that seemed to matter to the two civilian contractors who confronted her outside the base's operations center. Nia was walking to a briefing, her flight suit crisp, her rank insignia gleaming on her shoulders. She carried a helmet bag in one hand, her stride purposeful as she prepared for a training mission with the 90th Fighter Squadron. The contractors, both white men in their 40s working for a defense firm tasked with maintenance, were standing near the entrance, their conversation halting as she approached. One of them, a man named Greg Lawson, stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he looked her up and down. "Ma'am, you need to take that uniform off," Lawson said, his tone sharp and authoritative. "You can't just walk around wearing that." Nia stopped, her expression calm, but her eyes locking onto his. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady, though she felt a familiar tension rising in her chest. She knew this tone, this assumption, this challenge to her presence. It wasn't the first time she'd faced it, and she doubted it would be the last. Lawson's partner, Tom Bradley, chimed in, his voice carrying a hint of condescension. "That's an officer's uniform," he said, pointing at her captain's bars. "You can't just put that on and play pretend. This is a secure area." Nia's jaw tightened, but she kept her composure. She had dealt with skepticism about her credentials before, from instructors who doubted her skills, from peers who questioned her place in the cockpit, from strangers who assumed she couldn't possibly be a fighter pilot. But this was different. This was her base, her home, where she had earned her place through sweat, skill, and sacrifice. "I'm Captain Nia Carter," she said, her voice clear and firm. "I'm a pilot with the 90th Fighter Squadron. This is my uniform, and I belong here." Lawson scoffed, crossing his arms. "Yeah, right," he said. "We've been working here for years, and we know who's who. You need to go back to wherever you got that costume and change." Bradley nodded, his smirk barely concealed. "Look, we don't want trouble," he said. "Just take it off and head out before security gets involved." Nia's heart pounded, not from fear but from the sheer audacity of their words. She was standing on a military base, in her flight suit, minutes away from climbing into a $150 million jet, and these men were questioning her right to be there. She could have called for a superior, could have shown her ID, but something in her refused to back down. She had fought too hard, too long, to let this slide. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice like steel. "And I'm not taking off my uniform. If you have a problem, take it up with my commanding officer." The confrontation drew attention. A few airmen passing by slowed their steps, their eyes darting between Nia and the contractors. One of them, a young sergeant named Malik Jones, recognized Nia and stepped forward. "Everything okay, Captain Carter?" he asked, his tone respectful but wary. "These gentlemen seem to think I'm not supposed to be here," Nia said, her eyes never leaving Lawson's. "They want me to take off my uniform." Malik's face hardened. "Ma'am, you're good," he said, turning to the contractors. "She's a pilot, one of the best we've got. You're out of line." Lawson's face reddened, but he didn't back down. "We'll see about that," he said, pulling out his phone as if to call someone. Bradley muttered something under his breath, too low for Nia to hear, but the hostility was clear. She stood her ground, her posture unwavering, as Malik stayed by her side, his presence a quiet show of support. Before the situation could escalate further, Nia's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Mark Evans, appeared. He had been alerted by another airman who had overheard the exchange. Evans, a seasoned pilot with a no-nonsense demeanor, took one look at the scene and stepped between Nia and the contractors. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice carrying the weight of command. Lawson spoke first, his tone defensive. "We thought she was out of place, sir," he said. "Didn't know she was actually a pilot. She doesn't look." Evans cut him off, his eyes blazing. "You don't get to decide who belongs here," he said. "Captain Carter is a decorated officer and one of the finest pilots in this squadron. You owe her an apology, and you're lucky I don't have you escorted off this base right now." Lawson and Bradley stammered, their confidence crumbling under Evans's glare. They mumbled half-hearted apologies, but Nia barely acknowledged them. She didn't need their words. She had a mission to fly. "Permission to proceed to the briefing, sir?" she asked, her voice steady. "Granted," Evans said, his tone softening as he looked at her. "Get to it, Captain." Nia nodded and walked past the contractors, her head high, her focus already shifting to the task ahead. The briefing was for a training exercise over the Alaskan range, a complex maneuver involving simulated air-to-air combat. Nia was leading a two-ship formation, piloting one of the F-22s herself. She sat through the briefing, her notes precise, her mind sharp despite the morning's confrontation. Her co-pilot, Captain Ryan Delgado, gave her a nod as they suited up, his respect for her unspoken but clear. As Nia climbed into the cockpit of her F-22, she felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. The jet was a marvel of engineering, stealth, speed, and unmatched agility. She ran through her pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency, her hands moving over the controls with confidence. The contractor's words lingered in her mind, but she pushed them aside. She wasn't here to prove herself to them. She was here to fly. The tower cleared her for takeoff, and Nia taxied to the runway, the roar of the F-22's engines vibrating through her. She pulled back on the stick, and the jet surged into the sky, the G-forces pressing her into her seat. The Alaskan landscape fell away below, the mountains and forests a blur as she climbed to altitude. The training mission went flawlessly. Nia and Delgado executed their maneuvers with precision, outmaneuvering the simulated enemy and completing the objectives ahead of schedule. As the mission wrapped up, Nia requested clearance for a low-altitude flyover of the base. It was a standard procedure after training runs, a way to signal a successful mission, but Nia had another reason. She wanted those contractors to see her, to hear the roar of her jet, to understand exactly who she was. The tower granted her request, and she brought the F-22 down to 1,000 feet, the jet's engines thundering as she passed over the operations center. On the ground, Lawson and Bradley were still there, finishing paperwork with their supervisor. The sound of the F-22 was unmistakable, a bone-rattling roar that drowned out everything else. They looked up, shielding their eyes against the sun, as the sleek, gray jet screamed overhead. Airmen on the tarmac paused, some cheering, others simply watching in awe. Malik, the sergeant who had stood by Nia, pointed to the sky and said, "That's Captain Carter. Told you she's the real deal." Lawson's face paled, and Bradley said nothing, his earlier bravado gone. They had questioned her right to wear her uniform, but now they saw her in her element, commanding one of the most advanced aircraft in the world. The flyover was more than a display of skill. It was a statement, a reclamation of her place in a world that too often tried to diminish her. Nia landed the jet and debriefed with her squadron, her performance earning praise from Evans and her peers. Word of the confrontation had spread, and by the end of the day, the contractor's supervisor had called them in for a meeting. They were reprimanded for their conduct, and their company issued a formal apology to Nia and the Air Force. But Nia didn't dwell on it. She had a job to do, and she did it better than most. In the weeks that followed, Nia's flyover became a quiet legend on the base. Airmen shared the story, not just of her skill as a pilot, but of her resilience in the face of disrespect. She continued to fly missions, mentor younger pilots, and push for diversity in the Air Force, where Black women made up less than 1% of fighter pilots. She spoke at a recruitment event later that year, her words direct and powerful. This uniform isn't just cloth. It's a promise to serve, to protect, to prove yourself every day. Don't let anyone tell you you don't belong. Her story spread beyond the base, picked up by military blogs and eventually a national news outlet. A photo of her climbing out of the F-22, her helmet under her arm, went viral, inspiring countless others who saw themselves in her. Nia didn't seek the attention, but she understood its impact. She was more than a pilot. She was a symbol of what was possible when you refused to let others define you. Lawson and Bradley faded into the background, their names barely mentioned after the incident. But Nia's name echoed, carried by those who saw her fly, who heard her story, who understood what it meant to rise above. She continued to soar, her F-22 cutting through the sky, a reminder that no one could take her wings.